Okay, so welcome back. And on the program, we were expecting Tim Garza, our agency information officer, he was going to say a few words of encouragement at this point. And then at 5 o'clock on Tuesday, he called me and said he's got to be at the Capitol. So he sends his regrets, and he really wanted to be here because he likes GIS people. And so I'm going to turn this next session over to Christina Boggs, who's been my technical guardian angel this morning. Thank you so much. But she's also a talented panel moderator. So I'll turn it over to Christina. And this is the part that we want to be interactive. So as these speakers are speaking, think of interesting questions. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Christina Boggs. I work here at DWR. Most of you know me already, but if you don't, please come up and meet me. I'd love to put a face to your name. I'd also like to encourage you guys all to feel more open to email each other and to email the list. So if you ever need help emailing the listserv, let me know and I'll help you get chit-chatty. So when this topic first appeared in the discussions of GIS Day, I got super excited because data sharing makes me happy. And so with the idea that we were going to do a whole panel about it, it was nice because it got us all thinking about how we can talk about data sharing in a way that's applicable to all of us today. So to start us out, I'd like to introduce to you guys our 4 panel members here today. Starting on the edge, we have Steve Goldman. He's GIS manager at the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Paul Vase, who's also a GIS manager at Parks and Rec. We have Harry Spanglet, a program manager with DWR's DES. That's our Division of Environmental Services. And then we have Nathaniel Roth. He's the GIS support and webmaster for the California Geological Survey over at Conservation. And so the way this format is going to set up is we have people starting with a brief overview of what's going on with their group, their organization as a whole, or their division. Oh, okay. And then they're going to give a brief overview, and then we're going to split that up into a panel discussion. And after we get the juices flowing, we're going to put it out to the audience for more questions. So just as a brief reminder, when we do go to the audience for questions, wait till the mic gets to you. We have a lot of folks on the WebEx who like to be a part of this. And so when they can actually hear the questions before the answers, it's helpful. So with that, we're going to start with Steve's overview on what's going on with Fish and Wildlife. Thanks, Steve.
So I'm going to talk about a couple of things that will hopefully spark some discussion a little bit before I get into a quick overview of some data policy stuff that we're working on at Fish and Wildlife. So I'm going to talk about open data, which is essentially data sharing externally, beyond out to the public. Authoritative data and stewardship, which kind of go together, and then what we're doing with scientific data in our department. So I think, as maybe Greg mentioned, the GIS community has been a pretty sharing community from the get-go, just because a lot of GIS data is pretty expensive to create, and we tend to not want to recreate it and have that effort to do the work again. So we've been sharing data for a while now, but there's a newish trend in federal and state government around open data and public data, getting data out to the public for transparency and for enhanced ability to do work with that data and collaborate with that data. And so that means that's data that can be available and easily accessed and used by anyone, not just state agencies, not just your department, but really get it out to as wide an audience as possible, unless there's some specific reason to. And then as a footnote to that, something I've been looking at recently is think about when you get your data, even if you're making it public on your department's website or your department's geoportal, think about how findable it is. Try and Google search for your data and see if it comes up easily. If not, there are a couple things you can look into to make that data more findable, because that's really what we want. We want that data. If someone's searching on that topic, we want someone to be able to easily find that authoritative data that's coming from your department, your unit, so they can get into it and do that work with the best data. So then on to authoritative data and stewardship. So authoritative data is really the data coming from the source that is mandated to create or collect or regulate that data. And it's well documented and it's kept up to date and managed well. So this is just maybe a push, and we'll have more discussion on this, to have more of our natural resources agency departments really take that ownership of those data sets that come under their domain and put in the effort to steward that data and get it out there and keep it current. There are some good examples of that, I think, but we all probably know there are some examples of areas that need some improvement. NHD is often talked about, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Maybe roads layer from Caltrans. Roads is a difficult type of data set because you have rural and Forest Service and all that. But those things, better work could be put into those, and we could get better data to use across the state. Let me talk briefly about NHD. So NHD, is a nationwide program, like Carol mentioned, and there has been no steward in California ever, really. Other states have some stewards. California does not. It's a big state. It's hard to manage that. We luckily got some drought funding at Fish and Wildlife, and we're just now starting a 2-year effort to update NHD in many areas. It won't be enough to update the entire state. We're now just starting on prioritizing where those areas are. There's going to be some North Coast areas, some North Valley, some East Valley, some southern areas. It's going to be spread around. We're looking at the priorities within our department primarily, but also other priorities across the state departments. So that'll be a good effort for the next 2 years to manage and steward that data forward, but it'll be a one-time effort. We need to take that and keep it going and find that other sources of funding to keep that effort going. On the NHD Plus, maybe a clarification that you didn't get to, Carol, was, so NHD Plus currently exists, but it's on the 100K data of NHD. The upcoming effort, which is going to start in the next year or two, maybe, starting now, so is going to be on the high-res NHD, which is the 24K or better. So that NHD Plus layer has never existed before. So NHD Plus is an effort to take NHD and do some value-added attributes to it, like slope and gradients and maybe stream gauge data and other things like that. And so hopefully we'll get the chance to get some of our high-res update information that we're working on now into the data set before the NHD Plus fully processes for our state. And then on to some specific stuff at Fish and Wildlife. So we have a ton of field staff and a ton of scientific staff that do a lot of data collection and through scientific efforts, create a ton of data. And not all of that is centralized and accessible and shared as well as it could be. A lot of it is, but like everyone, I think there's work we could do. And because of those kind of specific characteristics of scientific data being, people often want to publish with that data, so they don't want to let it out too early. They're kind of, the scientists' integrity is maybe at risk if other people do things with their data that is maybe inappropriate, so they have higher concerns of misuse of data, even commercial use of data. There are concerns there, although generally I would say as a government entity, if we're releasing data or producing data, we shouldn't care if people have a commercial use for that data. You know, that should be a good thing. We should let the data get out there and let people you know, do what they can and produce whatever add-on products that they can with the data. So what we're working on is a scientific data policy that just manages our scientific data and you know, covers the things that I have listed up there. Scientific data isn't always geospatial, but a large part of it is or could be. I mean, most science, you know, like most things, happen at a place at a time. And a lot of it for us is about species and habitat. And so this is a policy that we're working on now to try and pull together all these things and strike a balance between the need and the requirement that we make most of our data public, and the fact that you know, we can't legally withhold very much of our data, and also to try and ensure that we don't lose that data that gets collected in some of our farther flung offices and just sits on someone's computer, to make sure it gets centralized and secured so that when there's staff turnover, we have all that stuff together and accessible. That's all I wanted to cover now. Are we going to take questions now or wait till we all go through? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Next up is Paul Vase from the Department of Parks and Rec. Give you something else in front of you.
I'd like to read everything exactly as it is presented on the screen. Morning. QC is the core of the remarks I want to make this morning. No, I got ready because Jane had taken on very academic parameters for the panelists by giving us outside reading, against which we would have questions. Did you all do the outside reading?
Oh, no, that was just for you.
Being singled out. No, it was on Delta plans, co-equal, and other constructions. So I'm from Parks. Why don't I bring up our lovely website under Chrome? I've had 8 years with Parks, so I'm a beginner. Parks is a destination department for many. One could say it's a requiem for many. I don't have as a deep a need as Steve, because we have far fewer biologists actually cranking. Not nearly as many as Caltrans. Where is anyone from Caltrans in here? There's the elephant. Found it. Okay, especially Carol, with your remarks about highways and LiDAR being so key and critical. What are the major products of California in the world economy? Highways? Prisons? What else? The largest state park system in the world. So I'll just have that prompt. Any questions on any of these things you see? All right, what else? I'm the comic relief. I really shouldn't chatter on because there are some important notions that need to be brought up by other panelists. Let me show off something that we have kept under wraps, not very public at all. In antithesis to Steve's exhortation to share everything with everyone now. No W's, y'all. Memorize that. Why? Okay, here's the zippy keyword. Should I? No, there were important notions at the end of Steve's talk for misuse of information and privacy. Will dwarf everything you do for GIS. Be ready. Challenge yourselves, or someone else will. Where am I? I just want to go out and play. So just click a park. Oh, look, there's only one way to go. You can't misuse an application with only one function, can? Oh, yes, you can. So this is what we do. We focus all of our development efforts to focus back on our web team, which has a community of content providers, over 100 people throughout the state, and our units. This is the serious part of the talk. That funnel information. As you know, you have to have trees and roots, and you have to bring that information, concentrate it, evaluate it, and put it back up. Where's Steve? Right? It's never ending. Never ending. So our web team is, oh, here's a park to be. So if you were to want to see where it is, not yet. But if you were to look anywhere else, just punch in anything. Big Basin is among the parks that we are most proud of. The first actual state funds used to purchase property for recreation, for conservation. So there's your historical pitch, and you can bet it has a park brochure. So this is where you'll find the static, more or less static information about the interpretive material that remains. It's historical, it's immutable, unless it's revised. And then what we hope to have more dynamic on, sharing as a data process, concept, philosophy. Imagine we have had a long tradition of cartography, and GIS is trying desperately to catch up. We're short-staffed. So we're doing that. So that's how information is shared currently. And that's what I have to say.
So now we're going to tuck into the department, and we have Harry Spanglet from our Division of Environmental Services.
I don't have a PowerPoint. I feel like I missed the memo on that. So, hi, I'm Harry Spanglet. I'm Program Manager in Environmental Services. And Environmental Services, or DES, we were one of the pretty early and heavy users of GIS early on. And in part, that led to this organization of the whole GIS world. In DES, we have a lot of biologists who do field work, archaeologists, engineers, and even water quality chemists, all collecting a lot of data, almost all of it spatially, with some spatial component to it. We generate lots and lots of data. We don't generally generate authoritative data sets, and that's something that's going to be a one-time deal, but we generate a lot of project-related data, such as species occurrences, cultural resource occurrences, water quality data, and so on. So as such, and one of the problems with our data is that, as Paul just said, we have a lot of constraints on access, privacy, and distribution. For example, cultural resources are very confidential. Any Native American remains, for example. They cannot be distributed to the public, but we need to maintain a GIS database with access, so that's a big deal. A lot of the field data we collect in species occurrences is very sensitive because on private property, people don't want anyone to know they have a private endangered species on their property. So there's a lot of issues with that are sort of worked out as things go along. And that's one of our big problems. So what we end up, as far as data sharing, I would say we contribute data to a lot of existing data sets, such as the California Natural Diversity Database or the SHPO Cultural Resources Database. We don't have too many authoritative data sets that we give out. So access is one of our biggest problems, and privacy, and working all that out. We've just started undertaking a creation of a comprehensive DES data management strategy, which is going to be a multi-year project in which we hope to consolidate all our GIS databases into one, not unified, but one database that all makes sense, set standards so that all other information can be correlated or linked to GIS databases, and we'll work out the access things as we go along. We just started. We're probably spend the next 6 months creating the initial strategy, and we hope to have it in place within, I don't know, I'll say a year, but that seems optimistic. In that strategy, the big things we're shooting for is to standardize all our data so that one database can talk to another database without crosswalk tables, conversions. Everything works the same datum, same coordinate system on GIS data. Full metadata is a big thing. We're going to comply with the DWR GIS data standards, which, if you're not familiar with, is a pretty comprehensive set of standards we've developed. And a big push once we get in place is to incorporate or bring in all our historic data. DES has an enormous amount of historic data that sits in people's bottom drawers on a pad. And especially with climate change and changing, looking at historic data, that's become really valuable. So that'll be a big push. And that, I would assume, is going to be, because it's historic, would one day be freely distributable. So we use GIS a lot, in summary. We have special issues with distribution and sharing, but we have a big plan, and we hope to have everything very organized, be the most organized division, maybe, within a short period of time. Thank you.
I feel like Vanna White with these full-length walks. So our next panelist is Nate Roth. Oh, look, please silence your mobile device. You guys are doing a very good job with that. I haven't heard any phones yet. So our next panelist is Nate Roth. He's from CGS at the Department of Conservation.
I get my applause. I like that. Good morning. Morning. I'm seeing we haven't managed to put anybody to sleep that I can see so far. I want to start out by saying that I am with the California Geological Survey, and pretty much everything that I'm going to say here applies most directly to it and may or may not be directly attributable to the rest of the Department of Conservation. So data sharing and data stewardship in the California Geological Survey. I'm relatively new to the California Geological Survey and to state employment overall, but come from 14 years or so working at UC Davis doing a lot of data management with a lot of different types of data. The California Department of Conservation is in the process of wrapping up a year or maybe a little bit more long enterprise GIS planning process where we've developed a suite of roles and responsibilities for GIS stewardship, access, use, and in particular for its sharing. And I think a lot of us are looking forward to start seeing that becoming a portion of what we've got implemented, because I think it's foundational to a lot of the rest of what we're going to discuss, particularly making these data available both across division boundaries to other agencies and probably most importantly to the public. The California Geological Survey was a very early adopter of GIS in a lot of cases. And cartography and spatial information has been foundational to it as far back as you can pull a rock out of California's ground, which means that it goes back quite literally to the formation of the state and even a bit before. A lot of our data has been developed by USGS Quad. So we have enormous numbers of 7.5-minute quads with maps in different formats, different ages, different data standards, different formats. CGS has a substantial historical data set of data done with map info. Our number of active map info users is declining now, but there's still a few of them, and there's still quite a bit of data that was stored in that format that we're working with now. We've also got data in GIS formats that reaches back 20-something years, essentially to the foundation of a lot of what we think of as modern practitioners GIS that we're dealing with. We have the advantage in that most cases, these data, the programs that generated them, there's a clear inheritance of responsibility for those data. So when we need to, we can go and we can knock on somebody's door and say, hey, this data needs something done to it. Are you the right person to talk with? And most of the time we'll get a correct answer for that. We've also got a challenge in that we've got a fair amount of upcoming staff retirements. So the archival of this data and the knowledge of what went into creating it is something that we're confronting and needing to get ahead of right now. So one of the things that we're doing is we're starting to transition a lot of these data into common data sets, single data sets, merging the quads using an extract, transform, and load type of process to migrate the data while preserving as much of the provenance of that data as we possibly can. This has been an interesting adventure. It's been a large part of what I've been doing so far for CGS. Really the goal, and at this point it is a goal, is to move most of these data sets into a central database where we can maintain and edit it through a version set of data sets, presumably ArcSDE based, where we can manage our sharing, our quality control, and access to the data using the built-in tools. And then to provide the appropriate final versions as services for any and all who may need them. So moving a little bit on into one of my I'll call it a pet peeve, making sure that our data, which we know as authoritative, is the version that other folks get to and that they can clearly identify that it is authoritative. I can go to ArcGIS Online and search for our data, and frequently the first few links that come up are not us providing that data, and we need to change this. And there's a couple of things that have been suggested that I want to pass along to everyone else as suggestions for dealing with that. One of the first ones is when you're publishing data through any of the indexing services, use a name that's clearly identifiable as an authoritative source. In this case, for example, I'm retiring all of the data that I've published as nroth_CADOC in ArcGIS Online, and I'm now publishing the externally accessible authoritative versions as a user that is California Geological Survey. I'm providing for each of those data sets, map services, or web apps that are listed in there, a thumbnail that I have created that includes the logos of both the California Department of Conservation and the California Geological Survey, as well as a brief description of what it is, again, to give it a little more of an authoritative flavor so that someone who's scanning through a list fairly quickly will be able to identify that that's what those are. Within each of those, I'm including documentation, metadata. If you're thinking about full FGDC is something that we're in process with, but doesn't exist for a lot of all of these data sets. So instead, we're making sure that we have complete descriptions of where the data is from, who generated it, when it is, what appropriate uses are, access requirements, and where to go to get additional information should you wish to. I'm trying to get this data out there and available. I'm making sure that we're listing each of these data sets with service URLs and descriptions on our websites. Each web app that I'm building, I'm including a set of links within a tab on it that provides people access to the services that are consumed by that app. And I'm registering them with ArcGIS Online. Going to be moving towards making use of their open data platform more than we are at the moment to try to make it more accessible to a larger number of folks, and trying to get them linked into more of the federated data cataloging that's going on, like the California GIS portal, which would then feed up to the federal data portals. So that's kind of where I wanted to leave things with right now, and let things move more on towards discussion.
Oh. All right, come sit at the table.
Hi, Nate. About your, is that the browse graphic element in the metadata that you were highlighting?
The, those are not the browse data that are built into the metadata. Those are independently prepared and uploaded, in this case, to the profiles for the data sets in ArcGIS Online.
So it's an embedded element in an otherwise standard body of metadata. I got him now, huh?
Well, when we do have full metadata, I definitely will be bringing those into that.
The visual is so critical, so thanks.
Well, thanks to each of you for giving us an opening view on data sharing and what's going on in your different organizations. So just to get us started, I had a couple of questions. Starting, I guess, from an individual perspective. What could I do as an individual to better migrate my organization to a sharing place? Maybe a better sharing place than we're currently at.
I don't know. I guess first you have to ensure that you have the authority to share whatever data you have access to or that you're the steward of. And then if you don't have access to your web space, you can always post to the GeoPortal, or you can maybe get access to your ArcGIS Online account if you don't. Those are both good places to publish data if you don't have a place within your organization to do so. And, look towards those, especially from the White House as the Open Data Initiative. You can familiarize your peers with that and those movements to make data more available for public use. And also, as state departments, as far as withholding data, we get Public Request Act requests, PRA requests. And under those, there are very few legal means to actually withhold data. That doesn't mean you're going to publish everything that a PRA request would make available. There's stuff you want to withhold, but it's good to understand what those limits are so you can be prepared with that data should those requests come in. And making more data available can reduce the number of those requests and thus reduce expense to your department. So that's another angle.
Oh, going over? Oh, sorry.
Besides the government tracks, there are non-governmental organization tracks, such as Data Basin, or others that actively solicit contributions for posting. And so your key there, as Steve was pointing to it, as soon as you have the legal stuff out of the way and you're clear with complete metadata, you will find channels. And then another one, I'm going to look over to Carol, partnerships. Remember, you can't do it alone. If your goal, when you say sharing in the most general sense, can't do it alone. That implies someone else, so maybe hook up with a larger, experienced partner that you can provide some uniqueness or niche, and then you will see your data grow in demand. So that's your mic over there.
Okay, well, if I was going to give advice on how I could better share data, right? First, I talk loud. I usually don't need a microphone. First of all, find out what are your legal constraints. Like I said, can you put it out there? Don't be afraid to if you can, but definitely be sure it's something that's legally distributable without repercussions. Second, don't be afraid. You hear a lot about releasing data and it'll be misused. That's the reason they keep it. My opinion is, don't be afraid, put it out there. It's not your problem if it's misused. If you properly document your metadata and you point out, this is how it was created and this is the deal. If it's misused, that's not your problem, but that's the reason you frequently hear, especially among regulatory agencies, they'll come up with a conclusion different than ours. But if it's defensible, if you have put in all your metadata. As far as a location, there's plenty of public places to share data. It's better if it's internal, like eventually there'll be a state GIS portal. And then as far as some almost common sense things, which I already mentioned, is clear naming conventions. Not to be down on engineers, but they tend to come up with really cryptic names. I like to use English names that actually the title tells you what it is. Variables with actual names to them that make sense. Metadata, over and over, is really important. To me especially is the authority where you got it. The definitions of all your variables, again, if they're not clearly named, you're going, what is this? What units are they? Some assessment of, if you know it, of the accuracy, like a covering yourself. We don't claim this to be accurate beyond, 100 feet. Or the attributes, or we don't know if they're accurate. And also who to contact if there's a problem. With that, I find that is what I want when I'm looking for shared data. So that's what I would recommend to do to encourage people to use your data.
Go ahead.
I was just about to say that the joy of being the last one in the line is that they've already nailed pretty much everything. Really, the big thing is the documentation for me is, as a person who does a lot of the final step of making the data available, is don't make me chase you down to get more information about the data that you're asking me to share. And be clear within that documentation what the appropriate use and what the appropriate scales for use of the data is. That's particularly true in the California Geological Survey, where a lot of data is developed with the intention of it being used at a specific scale, and the access to GIS technology and web services will let people easily try to infer far more from the data than they really should be. So make sure that you've made that clear. And one of the things that I tend to do as I'm sharing data is, if there is a hard limit that I have agreed upon with the subject matter experts, I will sometimes enforce a maximum scale at which the data can be viewed.
Nice, thanks. So shifting up from me to internally, do you guys have any suggestions to better advertise data that we have available within our organization? Maybe how I can convey to other DWR folks or other resources agency folks that we have this data set available. What do you guys think? Well, you don't have to stick to the order, and if you don't feel like you have something that you really want to say on a particular question, don't feel pressured.
This way Nate gets the opportunity of open.
Okay. The Department of Conservation, as part of the recent enterprise GIS planning process, put together a pretty sizable list of the available GIS data sets and services. One of the things that we need to be careful to not do is to not let it become obsolete. Keep it up to date, and to move it to a more prominent location for internal access. Similarly, we've been, at least within the CGS, we've established groups within our divisional ArcGIS Online account, where I'm starting to share more and more of the data that I'm collecting to make that easily discoverable by folks that are using ArcGIS Online, particularly some of the larger data services or statewide geologic maps and similar that are cumbersome to deal with in other ways.
Well, it's a tough one. How do you get people to know you have your data? In DWR, I still know people don't know that we are working on a DWR data library, which we've been doing for a while. I don't know. It's a tough question. How to get it out there is, first of all, presentations at every meeting. We should We should have a state DWR, state GIS email list, which probably does exist already, but a one that, just general announcements instead of a discussion list. And we're depending on the DWR GIS data portal, which is supposed to be discoverable through a regular Google search to get our data out there. But again, from environmental services, so much of our data is weird that we can't just give it out, that it's hard, difficult question for me to answer.
So, half a second on that. We do have a state email list. It's different than it was 5 years ago. So, if you need subscription information, I guess during lunch I'll throw it up on a slide, and then I'll have it available for you, Jane.
I believe there's you're talking about the state GIS user group
Yeah.
list. I believe there's a link to it on the homepage of
Oh.
dwrgis.water.ca.
Good call. Yes, that's, gosh, the fact that we put that link up there weeks ago or years ago. Yeah, so if you go to dwrgis.water.ca.gov, and you have a state email address. So if you subscribe with your Gmail, I will probably kick it back to you. So subscribe with your work email, and then we'll make sure you're on the list. And I can help if you guys want to push announcements to the list. It's easy to do as well.
And in DWR, at least, we put our announcements about data on our currents, right? Our front page, we managed to get it up there, so at least everyone in the department has some knowledge of it.
At State Parks, we embraced enterprise thinking quite a while ago with coalescence of centers of excellence in the field, different regions of the state, evolved at different rates for GIS. But as we are now, enjoying Citrix administration of the ArcMap, ArcGIS server capabilities. So any user at State Parks is introduced to the data library through a standard instrument, what we call the Cal State Parks menu. And this was programmed as an add-in. And we see that it has spawned similar designs and architecture. For example, any theme manager users in here? Theme manager it takes what we have as a static collection that presents the framework and some specific things to parks, such as our facilities, boundaries, and things related, and then borrowing from USGS and other sources, CGS for imagery in a lot of places, and other ad hoc collections, as they are necessarily for parks, fragmented ownerships across the state. So we have the static build, and then we're experimenting with Theme Manager to give users flexibility, because as I see, it's difficult to bring in something new and then offer flexibility. You're asking for a higher support requirement. And so that's what we're short of a bit. So we have to go fixed template for a lot of things. But I wanted to offer you, the one thing you need to know about data sharing is Leo Anguiano, right there.
I know.
Your solution is
We're working on it.
right there in the
Yeah,
room.
no.
Work on him.
It's not there yet.
But we also see that relationship-based connections are so critical as well. And at headquarters, at least what I've tried to engender in parks, is that yes, you do your technical work at headquarters and all that service-based stuff, but you have to go to the field. You have to experience the systems as they are seen by users on a regular basis, and you need to challenge yourself to find where those link points, chink points, break points are, so that you can communicate effectively and intelligently with IT. Where's Tim? He's not here? Could you relay that, Jane? Thanks.
So at Fish and Wildlife, we do a couple things for internal sharing. We have a standard GIS library that anyone in our department can access. And it's been going for a long time, and it's managed by really very few people can write to it, but anyone can read from it. And so as anyone gets set up to work with GIS on their desktop, that's part of the documentation or the instruction that they receive to be aware of that space. We also have an internal email list for GIS users. So not just GIS staff, but expanding that quite a bit to several hundred. Anyone interested in hearing about GIS stuff going on or being able to field questions. So we have that list set up within our department to handle that kind of communication. And then additionally, maybe opportunistically, because we have our natural diversity database, which is certainly one of our authoritative data sets that gets used heavily by our own department, but also by a lot of others throughout the state, and paired with our BIOS online mapping system, which is the primary way to get to that data set, plus it holds hundreds and hundreds of other data sets. We pair NDDB and BIOS together for a full day of training, and so we have trainings. We have a training program that goes throughout the state that's open to our staff as well as anyone else, which gets out the word on getting to our data, information about CNDDB, how to use BIOS, which contains the bulk of our publicly shared data.
You're making me scribble that down because I'm like, I haven't taken that training. We're not. Do you mind writing it down? Well, if we go to the audience, we're not coming back, so.
Anyone more important than Chris in the audience?
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say one other thing that I didn't hear anybody mention with going online and making stuff searchable and discoverable is tags. Making sure you have very well-defined tags so the searches can be.
So Chris Higgs from the audience, she wanted to remind everybody to make sure to tag your data and your web applications so that it's able to be found.
That was one of my notes I forgot, was lots of keywords.
Yeah. So a few of the points that were made here to kind of wrap it back around was use the listservs. Within DWR, we have a listserv. If you're not on it, get on it. If you don't know how to get on it, come talk to me or talk to Jane. We'll get you on it. There's also a statewide listserv. In addition to being on the listservs, if you have a question, ask it. If you don't feel comfortable asking the listserv, ask somebody else who posted on the listserv to ask the question for you. Don't be afraid to network and use people for networks. So if you have a question about some data set that you don't know where it is, go ahead and ask somebody else. And they might be able to matchmake your data with your data provider.
Centralization of data storage.
Yeah, storing the data in the same places. So at DWR, we have Data Space, which shares a large catalog of where all the data is hiding. And so we hope to keep adding more entries to Data Space to allow people to find data. And as you get GIS installed on your machine, we actually have it now incorporated in your local LAN or your LAN person to make sure that you get Data Space installed with your GIS install. So moving up from internal, when it comes to external sharing with the public, how do you get your data found? And how do you ensure that people can find it? I know this was touched on earlier in some of your guys' presentations, but to reiterate a couple of those points. Maybe start from the middle.
Contact me.
So, I mean, I mentioned this in my discussion, but, I would encourage anyone here that produces data, that puts it up, to try Googling it and see what happens. See, does someone need to know the name of the department it comes from? Does someone need to know the name of the unit it comes from? If so, then that's not very findable. They should just be able to search in the subject matter specifically and be able to come up with your data. If they can't, then you should try and, see what is coming up and try and work toward that. Getting data into the state geoportal, into ArcGIS Online, those are all very good starts, but it doesn't always make your data come up in the first page of search results. There's a whole world of expertise called search engine optimization, SEO, where it gets into how to increase the hit and results of the page that has your data. One key first step is having a single page for each data set, and a single web page. And the geoportal, I think, will produce that. ArcGIS Online sort of produces that, but those are controlled environments that you don't have any way to control. At Fish and Wildlife, for every data set that we have in BIOS, you can launch a full metadata page from within BIOS, and each one of those is a standalone web page that we can then control. And with that, there's in the old world, kind of before Google, web search results were all based on just all the words on your page. So people would put all these different tags on their page to make them come up in results. Well, that quickly got gamed pretty bad, and web results weren't very good anymore. And then Google figured out a much more sophisticated way to do that, which included primarily looking at what other pages linked to your page, and what was the status of that page, and also other thousands of factors they look at now. But there are still elements within the content of your page that you can control, like meta tags and other elements that can really help that.
And then, so one more question before we pass it out to the audience. This is a bit of a softball for you guys. Is there anything to gain by using common reference systems like NHD or things like ISO themes or standardized labels? What do you guys think?
Yes. Okay. I wish we had that layer of that someone produced of all the different roads layers that shows you take one street and there were 8 different lines that none of them matched up. And without an authoritative data set, what are you going to do? A big part of that was different coordinate system, different datum. So yeah, it would be nice if we settle on a state datum and a state projection system. Within reason would certainly, to me, help my work a lot.
Why is your work important?
Water, man. Why is my work important? It's not. No. We generate a lot of maps for regulatory filings, and we have run into a lot of problems with that. Things don't match up. Analyses don't work because proximity is off, because they're NAD 83, they're NAD 27, state plane, the measurements aren't the same. And if we had a standardized system, it would eliminate a lot of problems. One example in particular is a parcel or a point inside or outside the delta protection zone? If it's close, what are you going to say? Is it yes? Is it no? Because they're both in different projections. We did some conversions. So I think that would be a great move forward.
So yeah, certainly standards are good. And this gets to authoritative data sets, and that's the whole reason why they make sense and why they're needed, is so that you don't have 10 different streams layers. We have one, and so long as that one is good and it's good enough for most use, it will get used, and all the work that is done on that data set will then be able to be matched up and collaborated on and expanded upon over time. On the ISO keywords, I really like to try to keep metadata simple for people. When you start talking about FGDC standards, that introduces a whole level of terminology that most people just glaze over on. We've worked fairly hard to put together a single page of metadata requirements that is in common language, and the whole point is that if we can put that on one page, it can't be that hard to do. However, we don't have ISO keywords on that page, but it probably should be. That page is really about how we're guiding people to fill out the metadata as a data producer. When we get data in the department that then goes into our library, it gets that final kind of more deep metadata review, and the ISO keyword and other things are added in. But I would encourage people, if you're going to take one piece of that more complicated FGDC metadata realm, the ISO keyword list is a reasonably easy one to tackle. And again, that really helps with findability of your data and ensuring it gets lumped with other similar data sets.
So I just want to toss out one other item that I think we're all going to be finding ourselves confronting. In a world of services, particularly map services, most of which are being coerced into a single web-based Mercator projection, that for analytical purposes can do really bad things to the analysis of areas if you're not paying attention to what's going on. So it's something I think we all need to be aware of, that services, while they're great for allowing people to combine data, to bring it in together, to display what they want to, and to look for relationships between things, from an analytical standpoint, we do probably also still need to be making data available in a more appropriate projection for the geographic area that it applies to.
One last thing, I wish I could push, I'm a big fan, of standardized naming conventions would be a real help, because, you know, spaces instead of underscores has caused some problems with people searching, and plain English, some push to just use plain English and cut down on technical terminology.
If we just get you all off of ASCII and onto UTF-8, we'd be good. Why? Why is that important? Multilingual. Okay? I had the opportunity to attend a National Park Service and UC Merced collaboration on GIS Summit, and it was compelling to hear of the changing demographic in California, rapidly changing. We have to change faster than that, okay? UTF-8, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Those were the rehearsed questions. I'm going to toss it out to you guys in the audience now, and my beautiful Jason will run the mic.
Hi, you mentioned map services. I'm seeing a tendency for public entities to put things into services instead of making them available. Do you have any plans to do that, or is there kind of a consensus that if it's public enough to make the data visually available, then it's public enough to make the background data available? Are you going to go with services? Please don't.
Yeah, I think the core GIS data should always be available. If you're making it available in a service, that can help make its use a little easier to ingest in some instances. But certainly, if you're making it available as a service, the data should be available too, because oftentimes you can only do limited things with the service. You can't do all the GIS analytics that you want to do on the desktop maybe. So hopefully that's not a trend that the service is all that's available and the data is not.
It also depends on the type of service you're making available. Many of these data types can be made available as vector services, so you can provide the actual data through a service, which means that, for example, if you've got a featured layer that's published as a service through ArcGIS Online or through your own Arc server, those can be brought directly into ArcGIS Desktop. You can select features and export them for local storage if that's what you need to do for your work. So there are multiple options, and lumping uses a service as a name for a single item is probably doing what we can accomplish with services a disservice. How many times can I say service in a single sentence?
Another question?
Yeah, my name is Glenda Marsh with the Department of Conservation, and we have an inventory of abandoned mines, and we often get requests and pressure to make it publicly available. However, we collect the information under contract for federal agencies. There are lots of people who like to go explore. Wildlife and cultural resources can be damaged, vandalized if people can find the details of this inventory. And so we're trying to figure out what our parameters are for making some of that information available in a way that people can't actually locate the cultural resources or go get into trouble and get injured at a site, but still somehow make this data available. And so we're just starting to think about the legal parameters around that. And I'm kind of curious for the CNDDB and other things like that, how other departments have walked that line and made things available, but also withheld sensitive data.
Sure. So with CNDDB, it's a subscription-based database. So CNDDB, for those that don't know, is a statewide database of sensitive species occurrences. So those are threatened and endangered species, special list species, and other kind of watched species. We are mandated for that to be a cost recovery program, so that allows us to have a subscription basis for it. And the subscription cost isn't that high. It's a couple $100. So, it often would cost more than that to put a PRA together. So people, if they really want it, they'll just subscribe. Although that's really a special case. More to your question, the other way that I would suggest trying to get some level of the data out there to avoid PRA requests for the full data is to try and summarize or aggregate that data somehow. And some ways you probably don't want to do that are randomly moving points around, because oftentimes that'll not be understood by the user, and they'll assume that that mine is actually where that point is instead of reading and understanding that it's been moved in a random direction. It's just not a very clear way to do it. A better way to do it is to aggregate information into some standard set of polygons, like township range sections or quads or counties or watersheds, depending on what the data is and what makes sense. So for instance, for our CNDDB data, we have a commercial version and a government version. So a very small percentage of our data we deem too sensitive for commercial use. And for those, we aggregate them to the quad. So in the commercial version of the data set, there are all these specific polygons, and then there are these quad polygons in there also that represent very sensitive species observations. So you don't know where in the quad it is. It's not a buffered polygon, which doesn't really help because then the point's just right in the middle of the buffer, right? So those are some things to think about.
At Parks, we also share the concern for requests that are made of confidential cultural resources data, and that was alluded to in your remarks as well. One of the ways that's managed for cultural resources, and by those I mean archaeological sites, prehistoric, and in some cases sensitive historic sites, is to have a third party involved. It raises independence and cross-check. For example, there's a network of over 10 information centers for brokering. I want to use that term directly, literally, because fees are charged at these information centers, largely hosted at universities and other public institutions, where the brokerage of public demand for that information is coming in, and it is managed that way to keep government service folks out of the legal mess. And have an ability to have deeper and more consistent understanding of the content because they are distributed regionally. So I'd recommend that to you, particularly for mines. There may be some organizations that operate at the state level that would have representation at the regional level.
Anybody who's online who has any questions, please feel free to post in the chat. And Kate, if you could wave at me if somebody posts, then we'll have Jason run, or wave, and Jason will come run the mic. The next question out here.
Hi. I have a question as far as spreading the data into the general public and also getting data from the general public in a way of using social media like Facebook and Twitter and the likes. Right? Are any of you guys planning to use those tools? Thank you.
Many organizations approach state parks to provide volunteer services, crowdsourcing, and the like. Generally, over 70 organizations are formally incorporated and operating as state parks partners for state park operations. And so we supply our data on a request basis to those organizations that in turn manage perhaps a more community or interest area focused crowdsourcing channels. And we aggregate that, collect that, and we have a marketing and business development division actively engaged with research organizations to supply us what is the landscape of opinion and tapping into actual operations on the ground. So that's a good question. Thank you.
At DWR, because we're different from the rest of them, we run a very specific project. So we don't really have the public providing us input with data that I'm aware of.
So there's kind of two levels. One is crowdsourcing, which generally is untrained public, and then there's citizen science, which is generally more of a more refined, specific skills set of folks, maybe. And for us, for wildlife observations, we do take some information from the public on certain species or on, dead on the road or wolf observations. And then also with NDDB, we also get information on our observations from, not necessarily the public, but other scientists and other consulting firms, government agencies. All of the data coming into the Natural Diversity Database comes from folks outside of the program. So that's all externally produced data, external to the program. Some is from within our department. And then also in the species observation world, there are a number of growing citizen science organizations and phone apps and stuff that we are starting to look at as far as incorporating that information into the data that we have. So trying to filter out what is the usefulness of that data. It's not necessarily expert collected data, so how do you filter that and use that and make good use of it?
And don't forget, as an employee of the state, you're also an individual. And if you have a personal Twitter and you find some cool data that's available to the public, don't be afraid to tweet about it. I tweet a lot, and I ran across some public land survey system data that the California Department of Pesticides had posted, and I found it to be the most comprehensive public land survey system data that I had found yet. And I tweeted it, and that tweet got 15 retweets and a whole bunch of favorites. And out of my nerdier tweets, it was a surprising amount of traffic on that one. We have a question out there.
Yeah, with data sharing in today's world, we've been talking specifically about how the government can expose this data. One of the things that I've run across in just using Google Maps to take a look at some of the places I've lived, I've noticed that they have done a lot of imagery examination, and so they're putting roads down in places like Gray Lodge Wildlife Area that are maybe not exactly public roads, but they're mapping that out. Additionally, I noticed with Clear Lake State Park, they've driven at least part way in the vehicles. Are you guys actually monitoring that and checking up on that and then maybe correcting them with what should or should not be allowed? And then additionally, have you considered partnering with them to get some of this information?
Thanks. The question was on Google's partnership with parks for publication of road information. As you know, the Street View program, wildly successful internationally, has visited parks, and those are partnerships of Google's. Google has providers, people willing to strap on the backpack, as it were, and hike the trails, and they coordinate with parks. We have a formal, long-standing film permit program, similar to our scientific collection program, which touches a lot of what Steve spoke about as issues and concerns. So we try to formalize to the degree we can for informing at least that it's going on. But as you can imagine, Google's business policies are rather stringent. And so what they collect, they keep. And I have reverse engineered a few treks, for example, to inform ourselves. I don't know if you know this, when you visit a street view, if you orient the view of the camera, it's reflected in the URL. So the angle of view, not only the latitude, longitude base point from which you are looking, but as we walk a trail in Mount Tam, we can turn and look at a water crossing or a bridge and see that angle of view. And so it's very powerful, but they hold most of the cards there. So we're open to it, but after all, we do have to serve our users first, and then our public, and then so on and so on. So that's what I say about that.
Liz?
I'm going to caveat this by saying first that I work for an agency that's large in geographic area but small in staff size. So, and I'm remote. I'm in this Sierra. And as you were talking about open data and data in general as a state employee, a thought came to mind. You know, we're seeing a demographic shift in a lot of our state workforce. We have a lot of knowledge base that I would say is in people's minds and not spatially referenced. And I think that I'm gonna bring Tom Lupo into this. We had a state conversation about open data a while back, and he brought up a great point. We need money. But I don't just think we need money, we also need to have a sense of what agencies are capturing and managing what data, where our redundancies lie, what data is shared and not. And I think this conversation we're having today is a great start. But I think we have a fundamental need to better understand what our state's GIS resources truly are, what our workforce is, what our data management is, and how we're sharing it. And I don't really think we even have a document statewide or a database or anything of that nature that really kind of captured a more inherent understanding of what our GIS resources are more globally. So it's a kind of more of a comment.
Well, this relates very closely to a discussion that we had at the last GIS Council meeting, where we strongly suggested that it was time to reinvigorate the GIS Leadership Council at the state level to help provide exactly some of that type of coordination.
And one other resource that we have available to us, like Saul is here in the room. Saul McCrae, for those of you guys who don't know him, he's one of the co-chairs of the California State Government GIS User Group. And as users, we have a voice too. So I encourage you to bring that up at the next user group meeting too.
Hi, Dean Chang from Fish and Wildlife. I have a question when I was listening to the talk about how to share data from the individual level to the organization, within the organization, and then statewide is, and I think Nathaniel had a good point. Being from a web perspective, you're looking for everything on the web nowadays, but is there a /GIS directory under each department's website? What I find kind of, and this maybe is a question and a comment, when I look at our own website in my department, there's a lot of spatial data, but none of them can be searchable easily just under one single directory. They're all under programs. You know, our web content is very program centric. You have to go to one branch, one area to look at what data they have. Is a spatial, and then you have to go on another area. I mean, I wish, you know, we go back to, or at least, you know, I mean, if we have GIS managers, there should be a directory of GIS instructions, resources, links to just even to get internal staff to your own GIS resource. And that way other people can also look at it. Just a question.
Actually, I'm not sure that needs to be a question. I think that's a statement of something that we should be doing. As CGS's webmaster, that's one of the things that's on my docket of items that I will be doing for the CGS, is creating a combined GIS data access page that brings all of the published data from the very wide number of pretty different programs that CGS has into one common location for access.
And let me add, too, that I neglected to mention that at Parks we operate the SharePoint platform. So that enables those that are interested and active in data development or techniques and tools to post announcements. And also, if they choose to, set their alerts so that when there are postings or tweets, you can think of it as an internal tweet, people become aware of opportunities that come up. I think that's it.
Nice. We have about 10 minutes left. Any more questions from the audience?
Wow, glazed.
I'll use the closest mic. I think most of the panelists are aware, and probably many in the audience are aware, that there are 3 pieces of legislation that were introduced in the last session. And as I understand, they're currently kind of sitting in some various committee level, but it's expected that they'll be activated in the next session. One has to do, and I may be mischaracterizing some of this, but one has to do with establishment of a state data officer, chief data officer, and subsequently each department would have a chief data officer. Another piece of legislation would mandate statewide standards for data and open data sharing. And then there's a third piece that's specifically on Delta research, so which I suspect was a response to the homework assignment that Paul alluded to. There was a white paper recently published by a group spearheaded by, I think it was the Delta Stewardship Council. I get those different Delta entities mixed up, sorry. And it was an outcome of the data summit that occurred in 2014. And there is a big interest in, a lot of public money went to develop, to study the Delta and develop a bunch of data that's currently not available to the public. And so this third piece of legislation, addresses that. So I'm going to just toss it out to the panel or members of our audience. I don't know if Mr. Lupo's still here, but there he is. What's do we think that this is going to go, and what are we doing, or what should we be doing to prepare for that?
One thing I guess I'll say is that the whole open data kind of movement, especially in government, tends to be primarily focused around budgets and financials and stuff like that for transparency. But of course, the geospatial data that we all manage is going to get caught under that whole umbrella. So open data as a policy, as a movement, is a good thing to have us share more data. But if we start having open data, a chief data officer, spatial data will be part of that, but I think their primary focus is going to be on the budgets and financials to ensure, proper government operation, stuff like that.
Well, actually, I'll say a DWR with water, drought, and so on, a lot of this, there's a big push on just our operating data and GIS data and field data because the water contractors in particular want a lot of information and they're pushing for transparency, which indirectly does relate to budget, I guess you could argue, because it's all about money. But it's another thing another big concern in transparency.
You know, one of the concerns that was brought up by one of our supervising geologists was that these at least the open data legislation, doesn't, at least at the time that we read through it, clearly identify what the threshold is for the data sharing to be mandatory, and it leaves a lot of us that have intermediate or other in-progress types of data products that may be in a gray zone where we're going to need to try to get clarification on what data it actually fully applies to. It's also worth noting that the central data sharing, the open data access coordination piece, the goals for numbers of layers that are written into the legislation are remarkably unambitious. So it's something that we'll have to see how it pans out.
Thank you. Jane, yes, you alluded to some legislation that's been bubbling around, and there's even others that are earlier up the pipeline that aren't so visible yet. I think it's a pretty good certainty that open data is a trend that's strong in the country, but also in California in particular. And sooner or later, we're going to be seeing something that requires all of the majority of our data to be made completely open and visible to the public. And there's lots of reasons for that. One is there's always the questioning of what's going on inside the black box of government, right? Constituents, the regulated community want to see the data that's driving decisions that are made, which certainly is their right to do. There's the perhaps misguided assumption that there's something nefarious going on, right? That state agencies are doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing, so show us your data. The other is that there's a lot of folks in Silicon Valley and elsewhere that are looking to monetize state data, right? And those folks have a strong voice inside the pointy-headed building. So they're looking to get access to our data so they can repackage it and sell it. So that's coming. But I want to go back to something that Harry talked about when in your first opening remarks. You mentioned that there's a lot of data in people's desk drawers and notebooks and computers and whatnot. And with this trend of open government coming, with the demographic change that we're seeing, the retirements and whatnot, I think it's important for us to start to get a handle on that legacy historic data. Some of it's even current data that's really used. How do we do that? How do we get the professionals in all of our organizations who are not in the data management community, they're doing their jobs on a day-to-day basis, to spend the time and effort to clean up their data and make it available in central locations?
Well, unfortunately for us, we had started by hiring a consultant because no one had the time.
Oh, Tom, it's not that tough. Engender trust from the field to headquarters. Can I get a 3-point plan from you by this afternoon for that?
Well,
They won't trust you, they won't give you their data.
in the case of the California Geological Survey, there have been a number of projects that have been long and ongoing that have laid the groundwork for a lot of the standardization of data to make that next step, make it possible. And we're finding that now that we've got emerging and emergency-based needs to get that data out there, so we found the way to make it happen. Our case in point, and the one that I've been spending a lot of time on lately, has been merging 20 years worth of landslide mapping data into a common data set that we can start to make available. So in many cases, it's a need-focused push to get at particular product out and available. That seems to be the way things work. It's who's screaming the loudest for what particular thing and what pieces have fallen into place.
I just got to say, when I started working for the state, I was really surprised that people would say, no, you can't have my data. Because as a citizen, I'm like, but you work for the government and we're paying your salary. They go, so? Nothing says we have to give it out. And it was just surprising. So it's sort of weird to me to hear that you need legislation to create a movement of open data. It should have been there.
Yep.
The reality is it's not. People will hold on to it and say, because the fear I always heard is the public will misinterpret it. And then I interpret that to mean they'll find out we did something wrong.
Yep.
And we're afraid of that. So we're not going to show it to you.
So yeah, Paul said trust, and that's not a joke. I mean, you know, there is that trust that someone else is going to misuse my data, and so you need to work on that by showing, you know, that you can handle the data appropriately. But then there's also just pure effort. You know, they've collected the data, it's there, they got what they wanted to out of it. They don't have the time necessarily to digitize that data and move it forward. So that's a big concern. And so if you can kind of centralize some effort to look for that kind of data with some resources behind your quest to pull that data together, that can help. And then, as I mentioned, we're working on policy to at least be something people can point to that says, yes, you know, when you do these efforts, you need to securely store this data on our servers and centralize it, and then, you know, work on the sharing setup and agreements.
And to add a little more, good question, Tom. The trust thing extends to what policies are in place that would even begin to enable this. And I look to the federal government, again, I'm going to say hi to Carol, that we had an executive order released from the president that says you will write metadata, you will write it about what you are authoritative about in your data, and that will be that. It's an order, do it. And we don't have that in California. So we will remain cats. Have you seen the YouTube of herding cats? Oh, it's fabulous. I could transcribe scenes out of that thing and replace it with our geospatial discussions on data sharing and other things. It's quite remarkable. But the other part of the trust equation that just came to mind as you were talking, Steve, was the trust factor is that you will remove me from the chain of analysis of this data. Because if I've standardized it and made it so clear and transparent, you don't need me, do you? You'll go right around me, won't you? And so there's that, to add to your inhibitions, one of them with, you're gonna find out some bad things we did. Oh, we've never done anything wrong at parks. Because it's all play. We're just funning. And the other one that we do need the finance to come to the map. So there's a lot of inhibition to overcome at the human level. No technology solves these things.
Ooh, and I like that. That's a good point to end on. No technology solves all these things. So I'd like to say thank you to all of our panel members. And at this time, Jane, do you want to do the next introduction? Sure. Thanks.
All right, give us a moment. Okay, so we're getting close to the lunch break, but before we do that, I'm going to introduce Greg. The roving mic. Where's the roving mic? Jason? Yeah. Why don't you? Perfect. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to Greg, and he's going to talk about our recently completed DWR Week of Stewardship.
Yeah, so no technology solves anything. I like that. A great lead in. Last week, we had a week of stewardship where we twisted a whole bunch of people's arms and asked them to do a Herculean effort and try and take a data set and steward it. And as part of today, we thought we would try and recognize all the people that participated in that. And my hope is not only that the data gets up there and people have access to it, but you can also, as colleagues, talk to them about how tough it was or how tough it wasn't, and maybe ask their advice, and you could steward some other data. So I've got just a few awards or certificates. If I call your name, please come up. Sometimes not everyone's here, but if you're here, come on up and we'll pass them out. I'm going to start. These are the people that have kind of were started way before last week. So Karen Tolentino, are you here? Then no, you may not be here. Brett Wycroft, Jeff Galiff, Chris Klima, you can, Siren, I know she's not here today, we talked about that. Tanya Meath. Okay, now people that might be here. Aaron, come on up. Hold. This is a thank you, and you get this wonderful button, Kiss Me, I'm a Data Steward. I love it. Christina, no, I want you all up here. Christina, come on up. Thank you. Greg Twist, come on up.
I saw the buttons and I took one.
Thank you, Greg. And Terry Fong, are you here, Terry? No, sorry. Okay, so the people that participated last week, they may or may not be here also. Clayton, are you here? No? Oh, okay. For those, oh, me too? Okay. Cindy Moffett? No? Danny used to be here. He's gone. He knew he was getting this, so he left. Gwen Fong? No? What? She's down. Lisa Sawyer? Going once? Melody, I know you're here. Come on up. Yay. Steve Ewert? Scott Flory? No? Scott Hayes? You get a button too here? You did many data sets. You should probably have multiple buttons. Scott Hayes? Amy Zuber? No? Betsy Wells? Julie Ekman? Julie, I don't see. Janice Sutherland, I saw you. Come on. We did, that's fine. Here, yeah, that's what we want. Thank you. Jean Woods, she was. Kate, where's Kate? Come on. Kate knows about these things because in addition to being a data steward, Kate printed these up, so she, not a surprise for her. Meryl Jacobson, she was here earlier. Did she leave?
No, she just stepped out for a moment.
Ah, timely. Nate Buckles, are you? Nate, I don't see Nate. Ron Vinson? Salma, I don't see. And finally, Jane Schaefer Kramer. And you get a picture of all there's a lot of people. And since we're doing awards, everyone can sit down, except for Jane. No, I'm not done yet. Jane has been a workhorse for the Enterprise GIS Committee, putting on these GIS days, she chairs the Training and Outreach Subcommittee. And I would like to thank you. I got you a gift certificate at your favorite store. Don't open it now, open it somewhere else. thank you very much for all your work. Appreciate the GIS days, and we hope we have many more in the future. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm glad to do it, and I really want to extend my appreciation to my management for allowing me the time to do all this. And I had a great team, the work group of the folks that helped out with this, made this possible. Kate Spees, she did a lot on the certificates and other stuff. Mateo, Yanes, who's going to be running the web mapping app clinic this afternoon, and Melody, who is coordinating the poster session again this year, and Christina, who's there for moral and technical support at all times, and Jason's always around. He'll come to every meeting and do whatever we ask him to. And I hope I didn't leave anybody out on that. Meryl showed up and helped out a lot this morning. Gina Radiv. So thank you all. I wouldn't do this if I didn't have all of your support. So we're gonna break for lunch. If any of you who are new to the area need some ideas of where to go for lunch, come up and talk to us. We'll point you in the right direction. If you want to do takeout and then come and eat it in room 133, you're welcome to do that. Kind of take your stuff with you. I mean, somebody will be here through most of the lunch break, but I don't want to be responsible for your stuff necessarily. So we'll see you at 1:15. And don't forget, if you haven't voted for your favorite posters, do that. Thanks.